increase in pricing for consoles and games over time is to be expected, but was it really an increase in price? Do you guys remember what you used to pay, or actually what your parents used to pay back when you were playing Aladdin on the Sega Genesis? Well, let me show you. Now, like I said, an increase in price is to be expected for many reasons. Most importantly, inflation, supply and demand, and of course there's various other factors that we're not going to get into. But it is interesting to look back and see what we used to pay and see what the difference is. Is it a huge difference, a small difference, or does it seem fair according to our economy's inflation over the years? I want you guys to comment below what your first home console was so we can think about what you specifically went through in terms of changes. My first home console was the Sega Genesis. I was very young, but even now I still can't beat that stupid Lion King game. So the first commercial home video game console was the Magnavox Odyssey. Wow guys, wow, I didn't even know about this console until I did research for this video. The Magnavox Odyssey was released in the USA in 1972. Leave a comment below if you are old enough to have played this ancient system. I'm guessing probably no one. This white, black, and brown box, diversity, connected to your TV set and came with 2 rectangular controllers. The release price for the Magnavox Odyssey in 1972 was $99. So to put that in perspective guys, $99 back in 1972 is equivalent to around $600 in 2020. So yeah guys, it wasn't cheap at all. In fact, people had to sacrifice more to play this console than mostly everybody else sacrificed in the future to play their more modern systems. Now the one catch though, however, is the Odyssey included 12 games with it. 12 games nowadays would cost around $720 without tax, but games now are also very different than the ones in 1972, and most of them are a lot more advanced. Next up, we'll talk about the Atari, which was released in 1977. Now we're getting closer to some of your guys' existence on this planet, but still probably not many. The Atari was a home video game console that is credited with popularizing the use of microprocessor-based hardware, as well as ROM cartridges, which were removable memory cards where the games you purchased were stored. This is a big change from the Magnavox Odyssey, where you would buy the console with games already physically built into it. The Atari at launch released for a whopping $199, which would be around $800 in 2020, guys. The Atari 2600, which was the Atari release in 1982, came with 2 joystick controllers, a conjoined pair of paddle controllers, and a game cartridge, which usually had a game called Combat or Pac-Man on it. Atari games typically cost between $20 and $35 as time went on, so games back in the late 70s and early 80s for Atari would cost us between $70 and $100 in 2020. Games were not cheap back then. Now, of course, guys, I'm not going to talk about every console release, and I'm also not going to talk about handhelds. But next up on the list today, guys, is the Sega Genesis. Sega Genesis fam, hit that thumbs up button, baby. We are special.
Special ed.
Shut up, we can't make jokes like that anymore. The deflation of vocabulary from the 1980s to 2020 does not allow us to joke anymore. The Sega Genesis was a home gaming console that released in 1989. The Genesis plays a library of over 900 games that were created by Sega, as well as some third-party developers. You guys remember those big-ass ROM cartridges we used to have to blow into before playing? I know I do. Now this is a pricing video, but I do want to bring up that Sega had something called the Sega Channel, which allowed you to play games through a coaxial cable, allowing you to play games online. Basically, it was Google Stadia in the 90s, but from the way Google Stadia is being received, it might be better. The Sega Genesis launch price was $189 in 1989, which would be close to $400 in 2020. Now that seems more like a reasonable price for a console when you compare it to what we have been paying for the last decade or so. Now Sega Genesis games typically cost around $50. $50 in 1989 is around $100 today, so yeah, the games were still not cheap for the times. Did anyone actually beat Lion King? It's kind of like the 90s version of Dark Souls, except harder. Now on to the original PlayStation. PlayStation fanboys, stand up. The PlayStation 1 released in the USA in 1995, and it had a launch price of $299. $299 in 1995 is around $500 in 2020, so the original PlayStation was certainly not cheap, but I guess it's not too bad. The PS1 was the first computer entertainment system to ship over 100 million units. The rise of gaming really begins now, guys. PS1 games on average cost between $40 and $50, but would sometimes be much higher. $50 in the mid to late 90s would be around $70 to $90 US in 2020. Games are still not cheap for the consumer back in the day. Now, Nintendo came out with the N64, another one of my personal favorites, back in 1996, and it had a launch price of $199. What a great system. I have so many great memories on it. $199 back in 1996 is around $330 in today's times. Nice, Nintendo, not bad at all. Now hold on though guys, the N64 games are a different story. They could typically cost around $70 US, but could sell for even more. This was due to, well, one, Nintendo being an extremely powerful company at the time, and two, also the prices of cartridges for the games were not cheap. $70 in 1996 would be around $115 in 2020. Holy shit guys, I'm happy I was not a parent back then with a kid who liked to play games. A decent price for a good system, but the games, damn. Well, they were good games, I'm not gonna lie. Now let's get closer to the 2000s guys. Sega Dreamcast launched in 1999 with a price tag of $199, which would be around $300 today, and typical Dreamcast games cost around $50 from what I can remember, which would be around $75 today. PS2 came into existence in the year 2000. Yay, we made it. And it launched at $299. Typical PS2 games cost around $50 at the time. In 2020, the PS2 would have cost around $430 for the console, with the games taking about $70 to $75 of your money. You guys noticing the trend here? Games might not be as highly priced as we think these days when you compare it to our history. Don't worry Xbox fans, I will not forget you. The original Xbox, I almost said Xbox One, came out in 2001 guys for a price tag of $299. This was similar to the PS2. The Xbox games were usually $50. Shout out to my Halo 1 boys. For those of you who are too young to remember these days, well, Halo 1 on Xbox was not an online game. We had to play split screen, or everyone had to get together and system link their Xboxes. The good old days of screen looking fights. And just like the PS2, the modern day price for the original Xbox will be around $400 to $450, and games will be over $70. The GameCube also launched in 2001 and was released for an affordable price of $199 at launch, which would be closer to $300 in 2020, a very affordable price for a home console system. I'll give another shout out to my Super Smash Bros. Melee players. Now games for the GameCube sold typically for around $50, just like the Xbox and PS2 games did as well. Alright guys, on to the final section. The Xbox 360 was launched in 2005 with a price tag of either $299 or $399 depending on what version you wanted. If you spent the $399, that would be worth over $500 in 2020. Xbox 360 helped set the trend for the $10 game price increase as well, making most of their bigger games cost $60. $60 in 2005 would be around $80 now. That's kind of steep. Now PS3 guys raised the price bar high with their 2006 console launch, releasing at $499 or $599 depending on which version you chose. $599 in 2006 is worth over $750 today. Wow. I was an Xbox player at the start of this era and did not get a PS3 until much later when the prices were way down. PS3 games were $60 on average, which is around $75 today. The Wii also launched at $250 in 2006. We made it guys, we are on to more modern systems. The PS4 launched at $399 in 2013, while Xbox launched at $499. PlayStation actually killed Xbox in this generation of consoles, selling more than double the amount of units than Xbox did. It's kinda crazy. It will be interesting to see what the PS5 and Xbox Series X price tags are and see which system does better. Will it be much closer this time, or will PlayStation murder Xbox in sales like they did before? Don't forget Nintendo Switch, it came out in 2017 for a price tag of $299. So guys, really it was much more of a financial sacrifice to play video games back in the day. Judging by the price fluctuation, considering inflation into the equation, if PS5 and Xbox Series X are as good as they say they are, paying the rumored $499 at launch really isn't too bad. The price of games overall has also dropped when you consider inflation and the various other factors. Can you imagine in today's world paying $115 for a PS4 game like you would have paid for some N64 games back in the day? It's really interesting to think about. I wonder if the next gen consoles in 2020 will add a price increase to our games. I hope not, but at least we're not paying what people did in the 1970s and 1980s for their games. Now, if any of you guys are still here in the video, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of bonus information. This might blow your mind. In around 1991, a Japanese system called the Neo Geo was released to the USA. I think it came out in 1990 in Japan. This was also a home video game console. Guys, it sold for around $650. In 2020, that would be the equivalent of over $1,200. Absolutely insane. Now, it did sell less than 1 million units worldwide, which is still more than I would have thought. but it's just so crazy to think that some people actually paid the equivalent of $1,200 back in 1990 for probably a very old-fashioned video game system. I'm sure at the time it was probably amazing, but wow, it's just crazy to think about. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, guys. I'm going to do many more videos like this. I also do gaming tutorials, game reviews, comedy videos, and live streams on this channel, so I'm sure there's something for you. I'd love to see some of your guys' ugly faces again in the future. I'll see you guys on the next one.
I'm about to kill it, gotta be the kid, I gotta be the villain. I be underrated, now I gotta do it. I'm a warrior, I'm coming with the truth. So shit, yeah, that's how we march. Back in the game when